Remember Mandalore. RK equals. Part 10. Industrial Sector. Sundari. Mandalore. I've been Mandalore for 2 days and I already hate the bloody job. Endless meetings, most of which with people you could hardly stand, enough bargaining and deal-making to make a CEO of an interstellar corporation jealous. What felt like everyone in the government shoving their problems up the chain until you had to deal with them personally. And those were only the highlights. Pro tip: if you intend to go into politics and raise up to the top, think long and hard if succeeding is going to be worth it. Pro tip the second: it's much better to be the power behind the throne instead the one actually having to do all the bloody work. I couldn't wait to wrap up the most immediate troubles and leave Scarta to deal with this shit, even if that was going to mean I would have to handle the Senate with all that entailed. On the bright side, Piet arrived last night with reinforcements from Geonosis and some good news. Operations there were complete. All ground forces were extracted, the Navy had recovered or blown up every wreck we left after the space battle, and all our units had pulled out for either some R&R or to reinforce various positions across the galaxy. Even better, he came on the same ship with Arya and HK, who I immediately sent to find Vizsla. Dead or alive, I wanted him brought in front of me. He and the Death Watch were going to serve as great scapegoats for everything wrong on Mandalore. It was going to be mostly true too. I had what survived from Satine's government PR department point out at every opportunity who exactly allied with the Confederacy and invite them here, preferably just before or after the latest casualty report went public. Meanwhile, I was playing the role of the good and concerned Mandalore, visiting the worst hit parts of Sundari, when there were journalists around to show everyone I actually cared. That's why right now I was visiting the industrial sector. It was last on my list after checking out the heavy-hit residential districts. I used every opportunity to promise bloody vengeance to whoever was listening, and there were many pissed-off Mandalorians who loved the idea. At least this time I wasn't suffering alone. Thang Orvad was with me, showing the flag so to speak. He had his hands full too after his wife didn't survive the attack and had to ascend as both a clan leader and a CEO of their consortium. In fact, at least a third of the factories lost in the capital were either owned or worked with Orvad in weapon manufacturing. We should have 60% of the damage fixed within the week. Thang informed me after we spoke with the reporters. That sounds reasonable. I looked at the rows of large buildings strewn around us. While a significant section of the dome had collapsed in the area, the weapon factories were built with the expectation of such shenanigans. Most were superficially damaged and could resume production once the area was cleared of debris and the rail networks used to shuttle resources and components in were certified safe for use. The rest would need up to a few months of repairs, with at least 2 factories being a write-off. Orvad trailed off and pointed in the distance. My eyes followed his hand and I saw what used to be a factory. Most of the building was simply gone, with only twisted parts of its metal outer walls remaining. It was obvious that the facility had taken a direct hit during the bombardment, and that was something it simply wasn't built to handle. While a lot of the weapon and munitions factories on Mandalore were excessively armored and otherwise protected, that was primary as a safety concern pushed by Satine's government. Most of the manufacturing centers simply weren't expected to handle even limited orbital bombardment if both the planetary shields and the Theater 1 covering the capital were down. Do you have numbers on the recovery costs? I asked. Do you really want to know? Orvad sighed. The preliminary cost I gave you during our last meeting is going to rise. A third of the cargo subways are down, with some tunnels collapsed. Fixing that will take both time and money. We'll be able to partially sidestep the issue by using small cargo vessels to deliver resources to the surviving factories, but most of them simply weren't designed to work that way. Not to mention that doing so would be logistically troublesome. Solutions? I asked. Lot, all requiring more time and money than might be practical. It all came back to Mandalore simply lacking enough money to do everything I wanted in a reasonable amount of time. Your plans are good, Mandalore. Most of us like them quite well, in fact. It's feasible to turn Mandalore into an industrial powerhouse that can build us both a powerful navy and a respectable combined arms army. We can even do it in the time frame you require. We just can't do it with the money and resources at our disposal. The best we can manage is to start on the initial stages of the build-up. You and Yomaget made me well aware of that. That's why we'll be meeting tonight. There are some decisions to be made about the future, but this isn't the time or place to discuss it. RK equals. Death Watch Safe House. near Sundari, Mandalore. Is the intel any good? Nina asked. He and the rest of Omega were tapped for another hunt. This time they were after Vizsla. Personally, the clone officer hoped it would be successful too. Seeing Grievous cut in pieces a few days ago was simply indescribable. The clone felt elated, especially when the damn cyborg did its best to kill him and his squad. After dealing with Grievous once and for all, Nina is sure that General Kenobi would be unable to pay for a drink in any bar in the galaxy frequented by GAR personnel. Considering that this Vizsla character helped arrange the tiny orbital bombardment incident that almost saw Omega buried in a bloody warehouse, Nina was on board with dismembering that bastard too. That's what Intel claims. General Vale's pet psychodroid deadpanned. By now you should all know not to trust Intel without double and triple checking no matter what they claim. That way you'll live longer. HK sagely advised. He might be a royal pain in the ass, but he knows what he speaks of. Arya nodded. At least as far as war and killing people is concerned. The Chiss woman added. So we're going to check. Carefully. Nina shrugged. It wasn't like Intel failed to burn him in the past, though usually he tried very hard not to think about those cases. The small group was hidden behind a hill overlooking a tiny settlement, just 2 rows of buildings set up around a road leading to the capital. The only reason the place existed was a small, mostly automated mining operation for various silicates which could be found under the local desert. The only notable thing around was a pair of landing pads and 2 hangars barely big enough to handle the fighter/transport combo favored by the Mandalorians. That's the general idea. Remember, if practical, the general wants Vizsla brought in alive. However, we're under orders not to risk our lives over that lowlife. Arya, who was technically in charge of the operation, ordered. She might be a Sith in training, but that didn't mean she wanted to explain to her master how she got his soldier killed. What's the plan, Mom? Nina asked. HK's going in as a scout. He can use his stealth field to check if our quarry is here. You're setting up a sniper nest up there. Arya pointed at the top of the hill, after checking up for any nasty surprises. The rest of us will sneak closer and be ready to provide support if HK finds either Vizsla or any trace of Death Watch presence. Any concerns? Arya asked the veteran soldier. Nina was surprised that his opinion was asked for in the first place. In his experience, a lot of officers, especially Jedi, didn't bother to do so once they made up their mind, even if he had worked with a few who were a pleasant exception to that rule. Well, Mom, if I might suggest a few alternations. RK Part 11. Mandalore's office. Mandal Motors HQ. Sundari, Mandalore. Can you remind me why the Crifai wanted this bloody job in the first place? I snapped after finished skimming through yet another datapad and placed it next to the growing pile of complete paperwork. Despite my best efforts, the pile with things to go through was steadily growing and I was yet to start the various meetings I was scheduled to attend today. It sounded like a good idea at the time, sir? Piet guessed. My aide had arrived 24 hours ago and by this morning he was up to speed with his expanded duties. It wasn't something that made him particularly happy, but at least handling all the additional work coming his way would look great on his resume, both in the army and civilian life. None of that changed one inevitable fact: running a whole world, much less what I was hoping to become a proper interstellar nation, was an awful lot of thankless, usually boring and often frustrating work. And that was even before having to personally meet with any politicians hell-bent on making your life harder. I was already missing the good old days when I could simply force-choke the bastards and call it a day. Returning to Coruscant was going to test my patience and self-control like few other things did. Any good news, Firmus? I asked my aide. Orbital cleanup continues apace. Relatively intact hulls are being dragged to the shipyards for evaluation and either rebuilt or will head for the breaker to be repurposed. That particular idea came from Horus, reusing the more intact wrecks to bolster the Navy sooner than would be otherwise possible and stripping everything else that wasn't blasted to scrap for parts. That idea was going to give us the skeleton of a Navy a bit sooner, so I wasted no time in approving it and relocating resources for the venture. Of course, that plan was going to create additional work for Mandal Motors and make them a nice amount of money besides the other projects they were already busy with. The corporation was cheerfully expanding its industrial capabilities and hiring a lot of people in order to fulfill all the contracts I was sending their way. Guess who was going to be receiving huge chunk of Mandalore's budget? I don't know about being a good news, though there are a lot of reporters from all over who want to speak with General Kenobi. It finally leaked to the galaxy at large that he was the one to take out Grievous, and every reporter in the Republic wants to interview him. Better him than me. Schedule a press conference. I hope Obi-Wan won't be too put off with me for throwing him to the crowd hounds that is the media. It's not like I have the time for the likes of them. There will be enough of that when we're back on Coruscant. I grumbled. That reminded me, now I had a press secretary, a survivor from Satine's government, who was busy fending off the media ever since I became Mandalore just a few days ago. The last bit of good news, your wife has finished selecting your personal guard and they will be ready to meet you later today. That's one bit of tradition that I hope won't bite me in the ass, I stated. A proper Mandalore had to have a proper retinue made of warriors, an honor guard if you will, even if he was supposed to fight and win his or her own battles. Part of it was symbolic. You couldn't really hold the title without having people ready to fight and die for you after all, and that had to be obvious to all. Second, and more practical, they were supposed to be Mandalore's agents, commanders, aides, etc. Unfortunately, I simply lacked the knowledge about the locals to make such a selection myself. Usually most of the honor guard would be part of my own clan, but considering that there were two of us, me and Bo, that wasn't possible. That left me sending my wife to recruit me a retinue and trusting her judgment. Good to hear. I trust that there will be more than enough bad news and troubles needing my attention to offset the good ones. That was inevitable, really. Yep. First, there are various smaller corporations that want a piece of the action and will be raising hell until they get on board with the various expansion program. If we had the credits to burn, they would already have contracts or be negotiating ones. I grumbled. All they see is their big rivals receiving tons of government money, long-term work and good working relations with Mandalore. Apparently that make them nervous. Piet shrugged. That really wasn't his area of expertise. In fact, I should be having another aide to deal with the economic side of things, and I would be meeting her later today once she was up to speed with the situation. None of that changed the fact that the smaller corp would be a problem until I threw them a bond, and I simply lacked the resource to pull it off right now. I glanced at the datapad containing my schedule. I'll be speaking with people from the Economy Ministry in the afternoon. They might have an idea what we could work out. What's the next problem? The consequence of the orbital bombardment and dealing with former Death Watch members. Yeah, that was going to be delicate. The diehards were easy. We were going to kill the crap out of the fools. The ones who joined only in the last few months in a hope of ousting Satine's government and then switched sides when the DW began acting crazy, or at worst when Grievous enacted his own bit of murderous insanity. Well, the later groups were harder to handle. A lot of people wanted the heads of anyone associated with the Death Watch. Considering that my wife was a former member, that was out of the question, though I would have to soothe a lot of ruffled feathers. Then there were some clans that actually expected rewards for turning on the Death Watch when the chip were down, just another political landmine I had to carefully handle, preferably before it blew up in my face. I had the sinking feeling that Piet was just starting. I was right. =RK=, Death Watch safe house. Near Sundari, Mandalore. The accommodations left something to be desired, but given the circumstances, they were much better than the alternative, either a prison cell or more likely a blaster bolt to the head. The Death Watch's leader had no illusions what awaited him if he ever fell in the hands of the Loyalist after the unsuccessful coup he was forced to launch by Grievous. Vizsla morosely looked over his surroundings, plain grey metal walls of a small spaceport's overseer. A desk made of the same stuff, a few not particularly comfortable chairs and a computer terminal. At least the air conditioning was working, or considering the location, a rocky patch in the middle of the desert near the capital, Vizsla and his warriors would be nicely cooked by now. Sir, someone tripped the seismic sensors under the hill. The cameras show nothing. One of the guards spoke over the comm. I'm activating the QRF and awaiting instructions. Vizsla couldn't say that he was particularly surprised. After the series of debacles over the past few weeks that culminated into the death of everything he had been working towards for more than a decade, another setback was all but expected. If he had to be honest to himself, it was a small miracle that his location hadn't been tracked down earlier. The overall destruction visited upon Mandalore by that fool Grievous explained it. The Mandalorian snarled at the very thought of that cursed cyborg. Not only the machine's madness wrecked Vizsla's plans, it turned out to be for nothing too. Both Satine and Vale survived, and that Sith bastard was chosen as Mandalore too. The Death Watch's leader grit his teeth in fury and frustration, doing his best to calm himself down so he could think rationally. It was high time to get off the planet, perhaps to Concordia, though it was only a matter of time before the Loyalists sorted up themselves and retook the moon. No, going back home would meant willingly entering a trap. Vizsla knew that his only acceptable alternative was to retreat, not flee, damn it, and openly join with the Confederacy. Either that or simply vanish in obscurity far away from this sector of space. However, the latter alternative simply wasn't acceptable. He hadn't worked this long, hadn't sacrificed so much to quit now. I need information. How many of them are outside? Are there ships in the air or in orbit above us? Vizsla shook himself out of his funk and took charge of the situation. I want all our warriors ready for action. We're getting out of here. Understood. Something flickered on the motion detectors to the west, though they're clear now. I'm pretty sure our sensors are being spoofed. That wasn't standard MDF forces tactics. He should know. Those on Concordia, who answered to him, had identical training and equipment to their friend on Mandalore itself. Republic Special Forces. Vizsla grumbled. That probably meant they had some of their ships in orbit waiting to intercept anyone who decided to flee Mandalore. He smiled thinly. Prepare our guest for transport. She's our Tiktar of here, so make sure the enemy doesn't manage to spirit her away. At least the particular exercise of futility that could be laid on Grievous Ponchon for criffing up properly laid plans was going to be useful now. Vizsla took a moment to check up his weapons before picking up his helmet from the desk where he had discarded it earlier and made his way out of the office. The very fact that the enemy was skulking around instead of attacking or leveling the place from orbit probably meant that they either suspected he had the captive in here or they weren't sure that there was a Death Watch presence in the area. At any rate, Vizsla had to make sure the Republic forces, who for all intents and purposes had taken over Mandalore through their generals, were aware who he had in his custody. Otherwise things might just go to hell like everything else. Our guest is ready for transport. Everyone is armored and awaiting orders, sir. The same guard announced. At least Vizsla still had a few competent people left. That thought gave him much less comfort than it should have. In the last week he had lost too damn many excellent warriors and good friend. Good work, Sergeant. Here's what we're going to do. =RK=. You don't want to do anything hasty. A voice boomed over the spaceport's speakers. Republic forces, we're well aware of your presence. I would want to draw your attention to the office building's door. You probably recognize our guest, the daughter of one of your general's supporters. Well, that's unexpected. Arya grumbled. She was about 800 meters from said building and had a decent view of its entrance. That's an understatement. Nina muttered quietly. They could all see a pair of Mandalorians complete with full Death Watch armor escorting a young girl, and the kid was outfitted with a harness rigged with enough explosives to level the spaceport. Did I mention I loathe the Death Watch? The team's sniper added. I have a good visual of the vest. A lot of explosives, including at least 3 thermal detonators I can see. Dev, I'm patching you camera feed. They're making a point. Or just insane. The demo expert grunted. Can't do anything remotely. Trying to jam the area won't be good idea either. Orders, Mom? We either let them go or kill them all, Arya sighed. If they surrender, most of if not all of them will get a trial and get shot if they're lucky, and they all know it. The Chiss woman closed her eyes and examined the situation through the Force, looking for a better solution. She recognized the girl, and what the Death Watch mouthing off over the loudspeaker said was true. What Arya didn't know was if the kid was expendable or not. Astra frowned at that thought. She had been expendable too, after all the bastards who created her did send her to die. The kid didn't have much more choice right now that Astra once did. We're going to walk out of here, board our ship and leave the system, or the girl gets it. It's not like we have anything left to lose. Orders, Mom? Nina asked. Arya opened her eyes and stared at the girl, wondering what to do. Remember Mandalore. =RK=. Part 12. Death Watch Safe House. Near Sundari, Mandalore. It's curious thing, hatred. As someone who trained to be a Sith, Arya Astra should be familiar with that emotion. Along with fear and anger, that's what she should be feeling most of the time, Well, at least that's what your average Jedi would tell you. However, in her short life, Arya had seldom found herself hating anything, besides the people that created her as a disposable weapon and sent her to her doom. Yet, on that day, in the deserts of Mandalore, she hated. The Force Adept saw the parallels between her situation and the slip of a girl rigged with enough explosives to evaporate everything nearby. They were both unwillingly used only to be discarded afterward. It was probably worse for the hostage, at least Arya didn't know better or anything different at the time. "Order, Ma'am," Nina repeated in a damningly neutral tone. Arya glared at the spaceport. Her mind was discarding any plan she could think of as soon as they surfaced. Letting the Death Watch go was out of the question, besides it would be pointless. Astra didn't need the Force to tell her that the hostage would be as good as dead or worse if the kidnappers made it out of system with her. Simply assaulting the spaceport would be futile. Arya could feel the determination mixed with desperation coming from the Death Watch. They knew they were dead men if the rest of the Mandalorians got their hands on them. The Force Adept could almost see what would happen if she ordered an attack. The Death Watch would fight with fanatical tenacity, determined to kill as many Republic soldiers as they could before detonating the charges put on their hostage and going out with a bang. Arya needed another solution, one that didn't waste the lives of the people under her command, yet dealt with the enemy and saved the girl. "Nina, on my signal take out the Death Watch in sight, suppress all exits and get Dev to the hostage so he can dismantle the explosives," the Sith in training ordered. "Yes, Ma'am." "You have a solution on the little issue of the spaceport blowing up if we do it?" the clone commander asked. "I'm creating one now," Arya answered before closing her eyes and diving into the Force. Astra's perception expanded and she could feel every sapient being in the area, the clones, Death Watch, including those she couldn't see with her eyes, the hostage and a handful of utility droids. Arya's body sang with power as she concentrated and drew more of the Force within herself than she had ever before. The sheer power made her lightheaded and euphoric, made her feel as if she could do anything she desired. Arya pushed those thoughts aside, though it wasn't without some effort, and concentrated on the task at hand. A pleasant tingle ran up and down her skin as her power coiled around and through her, and then, the Force Adept was finally ready. She raised a hand, the gesture helping her mind guide the energy that was still raising in potency, and unleashed it, guiding the Force as well as she could. A shimmering, purple-tinted energy field surrounded every living thing withing the spaceport and froze them all in place. "Go," Arya hissed the order, while straining to hold a stasis field going upon more than a dozen targets. "Execute, execute, execute," Nina snapped over the command. Blaster fire erupted all over the spaceport. Arya could feel people dying, which allowed her to drop the stasis upon their cooling corpses. That was the only thing that allowed her to keep the technique ongoing as long as she did. Every moment was a battle, while the Force felt almost eager to obey. The strain of channeling and precisely directing so much power upon that many separate targets she couldn't actually see took their toll. For the first 10 seconds or so it was practically euphoric. The feeling of unrestrained power was almost addicting. The same went for the tingle of the Force flooding her being. However, the longer Arya had to keep the technique ongoing, the worse it became. The pleasant tingle became an electric current. The energy coursing through her veins turned from a soothing spring into a river of molten lava. Arya knew that if she kept it up for too long, the strain of channeling so much energy would simply fry her body from the inside, if she could remain conscious for long enough, that is, because with every passing second she was drawing more and more exhausted. Then, after what felt like an eternity, it was all over. Arya felt the last man she held in stasis die, and she released the technique. A small smile graced her lips. Then her eyes rolled and there was only soothing darkness. =RK=. Admin secure. Status report. Nina ordered after gunning down the last Death Watch member in the building, who was conveniently frozen in place along the rest of his murderous buddies. "No contacts outside. Fire announced. I'll keep overwatch," the sniper added. "I'm securing the hostage. Make sure someone doesn't interrupt me and blows up all Sky High." Dev sounded a bit strained. It was never a good thing when your demo expert had a similar tone. "I'm covering them," the synthetic voice of the general's pet killer droid added over the comm. "All clear in the annex. I'll check up the ship next," Core added. "I'll make another sweep of the admin and join you outside." Nina paused. "Ma'am, what's your status?" the clone asked.
He frowned when no response came back.
Anyone, do you have eyes on the boss lady?
A moment, sir, Phi said and continued a few seconds later. I have a visual. She's collapsed 400 meters east from my position. Advise?
I'll check on her once I've swept the building for any other unpleasant surprises.
Keep overwatch.
The last thing we need is for some holdout to blow us all up.
Ashe equals.
Military Hospital. Sundari outskirts. Mandalore. General on deck.
Nina's voice snapped like a whip. A moment later, his commando unit stood at attention. At ease, soldiers. You did well. I beamed at them.
Oh,
they did all right.
My first stop was the morgue to make sure with my own eyes that Vizsla was very much dead, which he was.
Missing a forehead and most of the head would do that. Exemplary even. A terrorist leader dead,
a high-value hostage saved and no friendly casualties, I continued.
Nina shifted at my last words, but only gave me a formal thanks. Don't worry. My apprentice is my next stop and I'm pretty sure she'll be all right. By your account she simply overstretched herself, I added, while examining the clones' feelings.
They appear to have accepted Arya as one of their own.
Good for them. It might be interesting to see where that would go. Beside, I could always use another Spec Ops unit. I almost smiled when I went past the clones towards Arya's room. Cole, Ordo and Mira were nearby and I could feel their relief and happiness without problem. It was fortunate that my apprentice was able to wrap things up so nicely. I couldn't have done it much better myself, to tell the truth. She earned me and the Republic some political points with the clan leaders. Vizsla was very much dead and Ordo's kid was recovered mostly intact. Then there was what that meant on a personal level. I owed both Arya and Omega Squad. I would have hated to see Mira dead. When all was said and done, she and Cole were probably the last connection I had with my past, with the exception of HK. I'll probably should do something nice for them. Well, at least I made a mental note to that effect and entered Arya's room. My apprentice was tucked into a hospital bed and hooked up to various beeping machines. 2 banks of clear fluid and one of what looked like Bacta were fed to her intravenously. Besides that, the room was typical for a MASH, plain grey walls and a small med-droid resembling an overgrown spider hovering in the corner. What are her injuries? I asked the machine. Extreme exhaustion, heat stroke, minor internal burns. She is stable. Honestly, it was a bit better than I expected when I got the preliminary report. She would be more or less down for a couple of weeks as far as strenuous use of the Force went. Just to make sure, I went to her bed and placed my hand on her forehead, then concentrated. I carefully swept Arya's body with my power, making her flinch in her exhausted sleep. Yep. She had overdone it all right, though fortunately it wasn't nearly as bad as my stunt above Geonosis. Before leaving for Coruscant, I should make her a milder version of the alchemy concoction that hastened my own recovery. Thinking about alchemy, I got an idea. It's been quite a long time since I crafted any items, the last time my first wife was still alive, but perhaps it was time to dabble again. After all, Arya was in for a gift. You did well, I muttered, then gave the droid some instructions that would make my apprentice's recovery a bit more comfortable. Then I made my way to the Ordosh. They were in an identical room, complete with a Gar medic and a med droid. Not to mention Omega guarding the entrance, though they were positioned to easily cover Arya's room as well. I hope all is well, all things considered, I asked from the door. Inside I saw Cole hovering overprotectively next to Mira, who was being scanned by the med droid. The doctor was busy checking various scrapes and abrasion on her arms. The kid obviously didn't make it easy for the Death Watch and bore the scars to prove it, including puffy and split lips and a big bruise covering almost half her face. Mandalore. Ordo straightened up and slammed his fist over his heart. General? The doctor glanced my way. Nothing we can't fix, he added. Good to know. How are you two holding up? And keep that for official events. I waved at Cole. Better than this morning, Ordo sighed. Much better, he muttered. You're late, Mira grumbled after studying me for a few seconds. I returned her stare and nodded. All the cheer and glum I saw when I met her for the first time were absent from our eyes. She was angry, furious even, though those emotions were fragile. I could clearly hear relief and fear behind that front. Unfortunately I wasn't able to live up to my legend this time. Close enough for me. Cole shook his head. Not for Mira. I nodded at the kid, who was still frowning mightily. The Death Watch are done. Their leadership annihilated and their last strongholds on Concordia will be soon under assault. But that doesn't really matter to you, right now, does it? I asked the kid and earned myself an angry scowl. A lot of therapy for this one, I guess, and that wasn't something I would like to undertake anyway. Not now and not for some time, I guess. Cole added. I, however, am grateful. Those traitors got what deserved. Credit where credit's due, it was Omega Squad and my apprentice who saved the day. And Clan Ordo owes them all a debt of honor. Cole spoke with finality. That's between you and them. I nodded. What do you plan to do now? I'm asking as a clan leader. Cole glanced at the doctor and droid. If it's not classified. He added, I'm leaving to Coruscant shortly. Both to negotiate an alliance with the Republic as Mandalore and answer about gaining the title while being a Guard General. Better you than me. Ordo all but shuddered at the thought of personally dealing with the Senate and Republic's bureaucracy. Beside that, I'm calling them home. I smiled. All of them. Cole gave me a speculative look. Ashe equals. Basilic's Rest. Nar Shaddaa. The Smuggler's Moon. According to some, this place was Coruscant's dark twin. It was the closest place that the Hutts as a whole and many of the galaxy's criminal cartels and organizations had to a capital. It was a moon so built up that it resembled one giant hive of crime and villainy. It was also a great place for any mercenary to find either job, short-term lodging or whatever gear they might need, especially if the gear was less than legal in what passed for civilized space these days. For more than 4,000 years, significant chunk of the mercenaries passing through Nar Shaddaa were of Mandalorian origin or found said culture appealing and eventually became one. In hindsight, it wasn't surprising that there were some establishments not only frequented by Mandalorians but catering almost exclusively to their kind. The Basilic's Rest was one of the oldest and highly reputable of them, something that meant both more and less on a place like Nar Shaddaa. On a good day, at least half the clients were Mandalorian mercenaries either just passing through, decompressing or waiting to meet a contract, something that had been happening in that place for hundreds of years. If you didn't know better, it would have been just another busy day. That day, there were some notable differences. First, all clients were either Mandalorians, or people the patrons trusted. Second, the various holoscreen which usually displayed many different blood sports, races or dancing strippers from half a dozen species, were all switched on the same channel. And most importantly, all the patrons had their attention firmly fixed on the displays. As far as many of them were concerned, it's been just a week or so since the galaxy changed. It wasn't simply the war between the Republic and the Sis that got their attention, though that conflict was a big part of it. In fact, it was a catalyst. No, what got their interest and that of most Mandalorians spread through the width and breadth of the galaxy was closer to home. It has been a week since the skies above Mandalore were lit afire by the flames of war. A week since the cradle of Mandalorian civilization was bombarded from space. More importantly, it was mere days since the most notable clan leaders gathered in Sundari and chose a new Mandalore. That by itself was novel. It was a long time since their people had a nominal leader they could respect, and Thin's Mandalore already had their attention. His name had been whispered ever since the attacks upon Coruscant. Then it was a mere novelty. A competent Republic general, who knew that they still existed. The Ryloth came and made some Mandalorians take a closer look. The words of Vale's exploits were becoming more and more notable, more credible. Especially when the people on Nar Shaddaa knew a lot of local captains who lost their lives and ships when they threw their lot with the Sis in an attempt to enslave more of the Twi'leks. Just a month or so ago, Geonosis changed things. It'd make all Mandalorian warriors worth the name stop and take a notice. That same Republic general fought and won the biggest space battle in 1,000 years. The war was escalating and it sang to the Mandalorians' warrior hearts. Their blood ran just a bit quicker. Their hearts beat faster in anticipation. They lived to fight in a conflict such as this one, yet the weak leadership back on Mandalore wasn't going to do a thing. Satine and her ilk were pacifist of all things, and unfortunately they had too many supporters on Mandalore itself, where their people's industry was concentrated after their civil war. It was an untenable situation that made many Mandalorians put out feelers to see if either the Republic or the Sis would have worked for them. It was either that or join the Death Watch and risk another civil war, something that a lot of them did anyway. Yet, all that suddenly became irrelevant.
The Death Watch was all but gone, extinguished within a week after they betrayed their own people to allies who saw no issue with bombarding Mandalore. To be fair, many, even most Mandalorians haven't ever stood upon that world. It wasn't their place of origin. Not their home world. However, it was something as important. It was a symbol. The place where their culture was born. And the Confederacy didn't think twice before unleashing their fleet upon that world. That little fact pissed off a lot of Mandalorians, even if most of them had no outlet for their anger. That was about to change. The holoscreens were busy showing images of Sundari, the most populated city hit by the orbital strikes along with many of the smaller cities and towns. The pictures soon shifted, showing images captured during the space battle, most notable a Mandalorian battleship ramming a Cis command cruiser that was trying to escape when Republic reinforcements showed up to save the day. And didn't the very idea grate on every Mandalorian who knew the details of that battle? Whoever edited the clips was good. Below the warships tearing each other apart, everyone could see Mandalore burning. The image changed again and made everyone pay attention. 7 people stood on a small podium with Sundari's wrecked skyline in the background. They all wore customized heavy armor with their clan symbols displayed proudly. 5 of them were known clan leader and they were flanking the other 2. Horus Yomagit was easy to recognize for anyone who paid any attention on things back on Mandalore. It couldn't be any other way with the man having the notable distinction of being in an opposition of both Satine's government and Death Watch. With Clan Yomagit being practically the most numerous, powerful and wealthy of them all, he could afford to do so. Next to him stood someone who only some of the older warriors recognized, Kal Skata, and many wondered where that ancient Krat hound came from. The other clan leader were harder to place. Thang Orvad, who took the leadership position after his wife died during the bombardment, wasn't a well-known entity, though he held a lot of power thanks to the industry he controlled through his clan and its allies. The big surprise was Merrick Bralla, who prior to the battle used to be one of Death Watch's biggest supporters, with both equipment and manpower. He apparently didn't appreciate Vizsla's friends bombarding his home world. Another lesser-known, yet important figure was the man wearing Ordo symbols. While that clan was almost extinct nowadays, the name still carried a lot of weight. That left the 2 people in the middle. The so-called negotiator, one of the more famous and effective Republic generals and a Jedi to boot. Yet that man wore 3 symbols on his armor, those of the Gar, Mandalorian people, and a stylized winged sword. They were all familiar to the Mandalorians who had studied history and especially the old battles, which was a lot of them. It was the symbol of the Jedi of old and it was placed where the clan sigil should be. The symbolism of it all was quite interesting and it gave credence to some interesting rumors, that General Kenobi had become a Mandalorian and married Satine Kryze of all people. Just as the last figure married the Duchess' sister Bo-Katan, a former Death Watch member. Said figure wore a black armor with 2 symbols, one of Mandalore and the other a stylized wheel that was a close resemblance of the emblem of the Sith Empire. He really didn't need an introduction in among the bar's patrons. There was scarcely a being in the building who didn't know Mandalore, even if this was the man's first official address despite a few public showings caught by the media. At first glance, he didn't look like much that knew Mandalore. A bit on the short side, not particularly muscled. Short cropped black hair and a pair of dark eyes. Average face that you wouldn't look at twice. Yet, even seeing him through the screen, the man had a presence. An aura. He commanded one's attention. Then Mandalore spoke. It's an honor to stand once upon the soil of Mandalore. It is even bigger honor to be wearing this armor. Vale wrapped his armored knuckles over his breastplate above his heart. To be accepted as a Mandalorian. To earn the title of Mandalore, to be elected by the clans as our people's uniting voice. He trailed off and smiled grimly. Someone else in my place might say it's regrettable that this happens in an age of strife, when a war ravages the whole galaxy. However, those wouldn't be words that anyone with the heart of a Mandalorian warrior would ever utter. For we know the truth. Being Mandalorians is the greatest of commitments, greatest of sacrifices, and that goes double for anyone who dares to claim himself a leader of Mandalorians. For a moment it seemed that Mandalore stared at the very souls of the Mandalorians watching his address. That is something the misguided fools of the Death Watch and their Confederacy masters forgot. They aimed to take power over Mandalore by the strength of arms and keep it with the numbers of the Sistroid armies. They were not true Mandalorians. They had no honor and proved it for the whole galaxy to see.
Vale paused and gave a grim nod.
The Death Watch already paid for their hubris, and so did their leader Previsla.
The last remnants of that coward's organization still hides on Concordia and will be dealt with once and for all. Yet, that leaves their masters. The people they made a deal with in order to claim Mandalore, the place where our culture originated. Mandalore shook his head in wonder. It's as if simply conquering this one world would have given them what they wanted, control over the Mandalorian people. They forgot who we are. What we are. They planned to subjugate us, to use us as expendable shock troops that should be discarded once their war was lost. A pause. The utter fools. We don't live just in this one place. He pointed at the ground below his feet. Not this world, not this system, or even this whole sector. We span the galaxy. Being Mandalorian isn't a species or a political statement. We don't have a central command that is easily decapitated. We aren't a single species or a bloodline that could be exterminated. We can rebuild our ranks with others who want to join us, others who have the same hearts as us. Mandalore raised a fist. We aren't just a mere people or an army. To be a Mandalorian is a culture. An idea, and you can't kill an idea with blades, blasters or warships. To the Confederacy of Independent Systems that tried to subjugate us, I tell you this. You can't kill an idea no matter how many worlds you lay to waste. Yet we can kill you. And we will. To the Confederacy leadership, you can take this as an official declaration of war between the Mandalorian people and you, a courtesy more than you deserve. Mandalore's eyes bored into the camera. To the Mandalorians living, fighting all over the galaxy, I tell you this, it is high time for you to come home. It is high time for everyone to remember us. I won't order you. I won't issue commands. I will ask you as one warrior to another, come and join me. Let us make the galaxy remember us and our enemies tremble at the very thought of us. Mandalore smiled. I know what your hearts desire. It's the same though, the same emotion that makes my own beat faster. There is a great war to be fought and we will be a part of it. Even better, our honor demands that we be a part of this conflict. It cries against the madness sowed by the Confederacy. We will lead the way and write our names in the annals of history so even in 10,000 years we will be remembered. That's why I ask you all to come home. Bring your weapons, your ships, and let us set our enemies ablaze. RK equals. Council Chambers. Jedi Temple. Coruscant. The large circular room was all but empty. Only a single tiny being sat in one of the chairs placed in a circle around an open space in its center. The Grand Master of the Jedi Order watched the end of Mandalore's address and his ears drooped in regret. It wasn't because Vale had betrayed the Republic, no matter what many would be screaming and soon. Not yet at least. But because it didn't matter. That man had his reasons for such a controversial choice. They might have even been good enough. It didn't matter. Yoda already felt the Force trembling. More and more Jedi were seeing the same transmission. The conservatives and many of the neutrals would see Vale becoming Mandalore as nothing more than a typical Sith power grab. And Yoda wasn't sure how much of such conclusion would be an overreaction. The one thing he knew was that the friendly Sith had seen an opportunity and grabbed it. The consequences, however. Did the man think about them, and if he did he care? Yoda closed his eyes, sighed and slumped in his chair. He could sense the turmoil in the temple itself. Some Jedi were confused, others would probably wait for more information before they made up their mind. Yet too many were scared and angry. He had to be ready to fend off the conservatives and try finding a middle ground. Because the alternative was unthinkable. The way things were going, ultimately it wouldn't matter who won the war or if Vale was going to show his true intentions. The Order was splintering, slowly tearing apart under the strain of multiple factions, and Yoda wasn't sure how to fix it. Back to Coruscant. RK equals. Part 1. Medical Wing. Green Site. Somewhere in the inner rim. Awareness came slowly. Almost like awakening from a deep slumber, and with it, relief? Confusion too. She felt something was amiss. That she should be doing something, yet she couldn't remember what. The woman tried to open her eyes, yet her eyelids refused to obey. That wasn't right, she thought. The sense of confusion, of that something was wrong, increased. However, that knowledge came slowly, sluggishly. She tried to recall what was happening, where she was, yet her mind drew a blank. She felt a twitch, then a soft fabric scraping over exposed skin. That light contact made her flinch, bringing even more sensations. Her mind froze, expecting an inevitable explosion of agony that simply couldn't be put in words. The woman waited for the pain she knew was coming. Then waited some more, yet the only thing she could feel was the sensation of soft cool sheets upon her skin. As her awareness expanded and her mind began slowly clearing up, she felt only relief. The agony, her constant companion for what felt like eternity, was strangely absent. It was miraculous, really. Finally, the woman managed to crack an eye open only to be blinded by soft blue glow. Her eye reflexively closed and she flinched as a lance of pain stabbed straight into her brain. The only thing that surprised her was that the rest of the molten agony she expected didn't materialize. The pain she actually felt dissipated fast, leaving the woman even more confused, if that was even possible. Whatever was happening came at odds with her sluggish mind's expectations, and that left her grasping for answers. Eventually the woman dared open an eye once again. The blue light was no less blinding this time around, but at least it was merely irritating instead of agonizing. She dared open her other eye too and stared at a dull, grey ceiling. Nope. That didn't help her figure out what was happening or where she was. In fact, she had trouble remembering who she was. That should have scared her, yet all the woman felt was relief that the pain was gone. =RK=. What's the sentence, Doctor? I asked and looked at a nearby screen showing Padme Amidala sitting on a hospital bed looking utterly lost. The DOS looked up from the computer terminal he was working on. The chief medical officer of the facility had a sparsely decorated office which among other things was a testament for the hastily built and temporary status of the facility he was in charge of. Well, she awoke a few days ago and the preliminary tests are promising. Only minor brain degradation, nothing we can't treat. While she's still weak and it will take some time for her muscles to recover after her coma, that's a short-term problem. However, the doctor shrugged. Mentally she isn't the same, is she? I asked. We simply have no experience with such cases. The closest thing I've seen was an intelligence agent who had been tortured for information before being recovered. Even then, they weren't in so much pain for such a prolonged period of time. Whatever that thing was. The DOS shuddered. Her brain's pain center was lit up even when she was placed in medical coma, which should have been impossible. Despite everything we could do, she appears to have been at least partially aware too. The Force makes possible equally wonderful and terrible things, Doctor. I've seen much worse, I muttered. Not to mention done. That earned me a dirty look. Thank you for your efforts, Doctor. I'll go talk with her. I'll advise against that. What she needs is rest. Unless she's more mentally disturbed than I fear, that might not be an option. In a few days her husband will be in front of a military tribunal. She will be called as a witness. Such stress is the last thing my patient needs. The doctor snapped. That would be for Senator Amidala to decide. The DOS glared at me, yet he declined further comment when I headed for Padme's room. =RK=. Senator Amidala, I hoped our next meeting would be under better circumstances. I nodded at the sitting woman. Her room wasn't better decorated than the doctor's office, plain metal walls, a lot of medical equipment, a bed, and that was it. If it wasn't for a datapad presumably with HoloNet access, the place could easily be mistaken for either a prison cell instead of a prefabricated hospital room. General. Amidala spoke quietly. She raised her head and looked at me with a pair of haunted eyes. I've been reading about your latest exploits. She waved the datapad at me. About the war and what has been happening to the Republic. It's a depressing topic. You've done all right for yourself, but you're correct, Padme sighed. Congratulations are in order, I hear, Mandalore. How did that come to pass? It's a long story. It wasn't something I planned when the Senate, in their endless wisdom, sent me there to negotiate. Very few would believe that. The senator raised a delicate eyebrow. Nevertheless, it's true. If you want, I'll tell you the whole sordid tale later. You're here to see how sane, am I right? The good doctors can't make up their minds. What you've been through. It changes a person. Usually breaks them. Am I? A sad smile appeared on Amidala's face. Broken, I mean? Perhaps. I would be surprised if you aren't. What she had been poisoned with, it either killed, broke, or drove people insane. Sometimes all of the above. I'm not the same. I didn't need all those tests to tell me that. Will you let that stop you? I asked. Amidala perked up when she heard that particular question. I don't know if I can continue as before. I've never been afraid to die for my ideals. For the good of the Republic and Naboo. Yet, this. She looked down at herself and shivered. Dying is easy. Practically everyone manages it in the end. Living on the other hand, I said. That's the trick, isn't it? I don't know, Amidala sighed. All I want is to go home and get away from this madness. Yet I know I won't find reprieve back on Naboo. No. I'm not sure how much of it you'll recognize when you go home. Naboo has been changing ever since the terror attacks. After you were put out of commission, the changes got even more frantic. I smiled at her. You're an icon back there, though you may not appreciate what is being done in your name. I've read about it, Amidala said in a small voice. What am I supposed to do? We were pacifists. And now your homeworld is busy creating an army and building its own navy. In your name. You don't know how to react. I examined her for a few seconds and smiled. Because at least a part of you agrees. Padme slowly nodded. Everything I've believed in. Everything I stood for. It's still in here. She tapped her temple. Yet, all I could feel right now is fear and fury. You know it, don't you? You can sense my emotions. I simply nodded. Her barely restrained rage was delicious. I think I know what's the right thing to do. What I should strive for. However, all I want is to see the Confederacy pay, Padme snapped with a hiss that resembled a large, furious feline. For what they did to Naboo. To my home. To me. Amidala shuddered and hugged herself. It's natural. Besides, you're going to get what you want. Amidala's head snapped up and she glared at me. You should be aware by now. The Confederacy has proven that they couldn't be trusted to treat with us in good faith. There had been too many atrocities, too much spilled blood for this war to end in anything but a victory for one side or the other, and none of us could afford to be on the losing side. What do you expect me to say? That peace still has a chance? That we should strive to end this bloodshed diplomatically? A part of me still believes that. Amidala paused. Or at least hopes so. But that's not something I can count on. There have been too many betrayals. Padme closed her eyes and grimaced. I can't bring myself to trust anyone who might claim to speak for the Confederacy. Where does that leave us? A very good question coming from the biggest proponent for peace in the Senate. We fight and we win. There is nothing else and we could do nothing less. Somehow I knew you would say something like that. A tiny smile appeared on Padme's face. You're on your way back to Coruscant to report to the Senate, aren't you? Yep. It's going to be an interesting experience. Hell, you mean? I don't think that whoever sent you on your errand to Mandalore expected you to be returning as the Mandalorians' leader. General Del-Qatar. What happened with Anakin? What did he do? Padme abruptly changed the topic. I'll tell you all about it on our way to pick him up. He criffed up by the numbers, didn't he? How much of the story I read about in the news is true? Amidala looked at me with hopeful eyes. Most of it, depending on whose version you've seen. Oh, Arnie. Padme's tone was drowning in exasperation. =RK equals. Part 2. Officer Quarters. Republic Cruiser Defender. Hyperspace. We were in the flag officer's quarters of the ship, bringing us all back to Coruscant. While the furniture was Spartan, at least there was enough space so we could fit in comfortably. Most of the room was taken up by a table that could be used for either dining or holding up briefings without issue, thanks to a few built-in but currently covered terminals and a small hollow projector in the middle. With the exception of a few lockers, a small bar, for emergencies only, and a refrigerator holding up MREs and a bit of decent food, and the chairs we were sitting in, compartment was bare. In fact, the whole ship still had that new smell to it, a whiff of paint, various oils and metal. It made sense really. The Defender had been commissioned barely 2 weeks ago and was immediately stationed at Mandalore after the SIS attack. In fact, the cruiser had been in system for just a few hours before I commandeered it along with some escorts for my trip to the capital. That's a lot to take in. Senator Amidala noted after we filled her in on what has been happening lately, especially some of the juicy details that somehow failed to make it to the galactic news. Our resident Skywalker was sitting across the table from me and holding a cup of steaming tea close to her chest. She looked at Obi-Wan and his wife, then nodded to herself. Should I presume that Anakin won't be expelled from the Order for marrying me?
Padme asked.
I can't really say. For all I know, I'll be sent away after meeting the council. Kenobi shrugged. Their loss. My wife quipped. Bo was sitting to my right, doing her best not to look too bored and failing miserably. I'm sure we can find you something to do besides my sister.
Bo, Satine hissed.
Obi-Wan groaned and looked my way for help. I just shrugged helplessly. That was one mess I wasn't going to get in the middle of. Besides, watching the sisters snipe at each other was oddly amusing. I guess married life treats you all right, Obi-Wan. Padme cracked a rare smile. It's been an interesting and very good experience, Kenobi said diplomatically. Amidala stared at the table wishfully. It didn't take a genius to figure out what she was thinking about, or rather who. We were on our way to pick up Anakin and he would be heading straight to the brig, not something either of the Skywalkers were going to thank me about, but my hands were tied. Offering him anything resembling support in public or where the troops could see wasn't going to do me any favors. In fact, one of the main reasons for our little gathering was to figure out what to do when we arrived on Coruscant. Now that Padme was briefed on the relevant events, we could begin brainstorming. Unfortunately, I was going to be out of my depth this time around. What can we expect on Coruscant? I've seen enough on the holonet to expect a media-feeding frenzy. What is Anakin looking at? Padme looked at me. If he's found guilty, it would be either execution or shoving him into a deep dark hole and throwing away the key. Anakin's status as a Jedi makes things more complicated. That's politics for you, Bo added, and thus earning herself a glare from Satine. I shook my head. And this was the sisters being in a cordial relationship. Perhaps. I'm not familiar enough with the Republic's military code of justice to say one way or another. In the end, even if technically politics play no part of it, we can't rely on it. Not with Del-Qatar becoming Mandalore. Satine nodded my way. That's how it's supposed to work. In theory, at least only the high-ranking military officers who would make the tribunal would have any say in the outcome. That's a double-edged sword at best. If the panel's made of clone officers, Anakin is in deep trouble. I'm not entirely sure how the tribunal will be selected. I'll be talking with Valentra tomorrow about it, among other things. However, if Anakin gets lucky, every non-clone officer might be influenced by the politics of the situation. I would like to state that this won't be the case, but given how fast the GAR is being built and expanded. I shrugged. In fact, the whole military justice system had to be created almost from scratch in the last year after the Republic suddenly found itself with a brand new army, not to mention fighting a war for its very survival. Anakin's trial was going to be a challenge for a new and largely untested system. If the circumstances were different, I would have written the whole mess as the price of doing business. However, I could still find a use for Anakin, and this trial had the potential to either shove Skywalker in Palpy's clutches or at the very least send him on a dark path that might turn him into even bigger pain in the ass than he currently was. Can you help Anakin? Padme asked. Not officially. He did cruff up by the numbers and killed a lot of my people. While I do understand why he did it, no matter how foolish it was, I can't condone his actions. On the other hand, I don't want to see him executed or imprisoned. That would be a waste of talents. However, I'm not sure how much I could help. Because I became Mandalore, my actions would be under tremendous amount of scrutiny. At the very least, I will be a witness on his trial. After all, I was his commanding officer. I'll do my best to push for an arrangement similar to what Windu got. It's another question how successful that would be. I'm not blind. Obi-Wan sighed. I know many in the army resent that Mace Windu got away with what they see as a mere slap on the wrist. I'm afraid that some people might want to make an example of Anakin. Is that true? Padme asked. Even without Windu's stunt, most of the GAR wants Anakin's head. The rank and file see his actions as a betrayal, and most officers consider him at best a very dangerous loose cannon. At worst, just a madman that needs putting down, or at least my feelers in the Navy's rumor mill told me so. That's it? Amidala looked appalled. Well, duh. If he wasn't potentially useful or a ticking time bomb, I would simply leave him to the vultures, though I wasn't dumb enough to say it aloud. After all, if it was anyone else pulling such a stunt, my voice would be among the loudest screaming for his head. Fortunately for Skywalker, I had plans for him. Well, it was unfortunate too. While Anakin is in a lot of very serious trouble, his situation isn't hopeless. Nevertheless, if we're to help him crawl out of the hole he so expertly dug for himself,
We'll need to be free to act in his support. That won't be the case if we're all too busy fending off various accusations. How do we approach the media and Senate? I asked. You should talk with Bail Organa and Ben Iblis first. Their help will be invaluable, Padme said after thinking for a bit. On one hand, presenting your action as following your orders to gain Mandalore as an ally might help in the Senate. Amidala paused when the two Mandalorian women in the room glared at her. That's preposterous. Doing so will destroy Del-Qatar's authority among our people. It will paint him in the same vein as Vizsla, just another selfish bastard determined to use us for his own gain, Bo snapped. That's true. Satine supported her sister. Perhaps putting an emphasis on your actions being what's actually best for both Mandalore and the Republic. That's the general idea. Persuading people that it's true is another matter. When all was said and done, my reasons for becoming Mandalore were complex and some of them I couldn't admit aloud without hurting my cause either among the Mandalorians or with the Senate. Perhaps both. Well, we were still few hours out of the site where Skywalker was held, so there was time enough for figuring out something. =RK=. Medical Wing. Republic Detention Facility. Location classified. One moment, Anakin Skywalker was enjoying the lack of the constant nightmares that tormented him for what felt like years. Then he awoke with a start. He instinctively reached for the Force and was relieved to feel her soothing presence. A wave of energy passed through his body, rejuvenating his muscles and chasing away the last traces of sedative in his system. The Jedi half expected that this was another odd variation of his nightmares, when the presence of a few familiar signatures in the Force made him pause. He jumped up and nearly fell off the hard metal bed he had been laying on. Only thanks to the large amount of Force energy he was pulling into himself prevented him from suffering ever a greater attack of vertigo and planting his face into the floor. Still he staggered and had to grasp the side of the bed with his artificial hand to keep his balance. Anakin shook his head in an attempt to chase the disease away and looked around. The room was familiar. He had been in more than enough med bays to recognize a lot of the equipment. Besides, the place felt like the prefab buildings preferred by the GAR. With the exception of the equipment and a pair of beds, the room was empty. Anakin frowned and searched his feelings. He was sure that Obi-Wan was nearby. He got off the table and winced when his unsteady legs were barely able to support his weight. For a moment, Anakin idly wondered how long he had been out and what exactly did he do this time to land himself in medical. His thoughts were interrupted when the single door opened and Padme strode in. Anakin froze at the sight of his wife and he remembered. She had been poisoned and... He winced. At least Padme looked fine. No, she didn't. Her eyes were tired, haunted. Because he was still deeply connected with the Force, Skywalker had no trouble feeling the echoes of pain and suffering upon her. That froze him in place as he stared at his wife in shock. Because of that, what followed caught him completely off guard. Padme strode until she was standing just in front of Anakin and studied him for a few seconds. "I'm glad you're alive, Anakin," Padme muttered softly. Then her right hand snapped up and slapped him hard. That was too much for his weakened legs and Skywalker found himself landing on his ass. He stared dumbly at his wife who simply huffed, turned around and strode out of the room. A moment later, Vale came in and snorted when he saw him. "Boy, you criffed up by the numbers this time. So much it's not even funny." The general shook his head in disappointment. A squad of clones marched after the Sith. Their leader, a commander, stood at attention and began speaking. "General Anakin Skywalker, you're under arrest." Anakin looked between Vale and the clones in confusion. He was sure this was indeed just another, particularly cruel nightmare.